Hi, Ling. Welcome everyone to Tools for Success, Navigating the Social Emotional Lives of Teens. I have a feeling you might have a teenager at home, right? Or you're planning ahead. We're so excited that you're here tonight. My name is Karen Firminger. I see many familiar faces. I get to work in the admissions office as well as manage our parent rep program here at Bear Creek. My husband and I have been here 22 years. We've graduated 3 children from here, and I'm still here working because I just believe so much in the mission of our school. Bear Creek, for those visitors that are not part of our school, we are a preschool through grade 12 Christian, classical, independent school. And all of us, the community, the parents, everyone is all in with our mission. Our mission started back in 1988, and we have not veered from that. There's an intentionality here. I see many familiar faces, and you have experienced that with your children. And we also have a nurturing environment, and the bottom line is that we want to honor kids, not just to help them grow academically, but as a whole person, academically, spiritually, physically, and socially and emotionally. Thus, that's one of the reasons why we have this topic tonight. One thing, just as a reminder, you are delegating for those who attend Bear Creek, your children here, right? But you're in charge, you get to parent how you want. So tonight, we're not telling you how to parent at all. In fact, we're just an opportunity for you to listen into a conversation and hear insights from people who work here, faculty and staff and some administration. And what's exciting about that, it gives us freedom and even maybe some personal stories to share. I do hope that you maybe take 1 or 2 nuggets away tonight. So I think this will be a wonderful evening for you, and you'll receive a lot of information. But before I continue, I would like to go ahead and have a word of prayer. Father God, I do thank you for tonight, and as everyone comes in on this beautiful fall night, help us just to be present and to hear what we need to hear, and just maybe apply some things, maybe try out some things. And ultimately, Lord, help me just to listen to you and how we need to go about raising our kids. Bless our panel, bless Dave, Lord, and just bless our evening, we humbly ask. In thy name, amen. So if you're at one quick thing, let me go back to logistics. So real quick, as a reminder, I see some familiar people who come to Tools all the time, Ling, so you know, right, that you will receive a recording tomorrow, as well as the PowerPoint, the video, and lots of resources. So feel free to take notes, but also know that you will receive that tomorrow. Many of you know me by now, some of you. So in our PowerPoint, there's gonna be lots of words. They're resources. You're not gonna be able to read them. That's okay, because you're getting the PowerPoint tomorrow, right? So just want you to know that you will be receiving that. Okay, logistically, we also, if we have any educators, all of you are gonna receive the email with the recording, the PowerPoint, and a survey. We hope you take the survey. But those who are educators, you've got to be sure to do the survey. And if you do that, then we can give you your certificate. Okay? Sounds good? Well, we're going to welcome Dave Urban now and get started. Dave's been around Bear Creek since 2000. But you know what? That's when he had his as a parent and his lovely wife, Rachel, and 2 kids. And now you're the upper school dean of students. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you.
You good?
We good there? There we go. Okay, sorry, that's my fault. Well, welcome. It's good to see you guys. I know on a Thursday night in the middle of the fall, it's a lot to come to an event like this and be involved. And so we're just so grateful that you're here. It's really nice to see you. And our goal tonight really is, like Karen said, is just to kind of come together as a community and talk about something that's very real for all of us, right? So this isn't about a perfect science. This isn't about like, here's 10 steps to walk away with and your kid will just turn out just perfect tomorrow as a result. I mean, obviously that's not what we're doing here. This is hey, let's come together. Let's be real about this thing called parenting, educating teens, all the different roles that we play in young people's lives, and just talk about what does that actually really look like to shepherd them, to love them, to care for them through this teenage process, right? And it really is a journey. We titled this this session tonight, navigating the social emotional journey of teens. And if those of you who are already living it, you know it's a journey, right? That is a really good word for it. In fact, even just the title, as I kept thinking about it today, I was like, I'm just exhausted thinking about the title, right? Maybe we should just pray all night and just go home and hope that God will help us just keep getting through it. No, but it's a beautiful journey. It's a messy journey. It's a redemptive journey, but it is a journey. And so this is just another stop along the path of that journey. And I'm so glad we get to do it together tonight. So in a few minutes, I'm going to invite out a panel of folks, people who all work here at Bear Creek, who are deeply invested in teenagers' lives, who probably work with some of your kids on a daily basis, who will help us get into kind of the weeds, right? We do want to come to a place tonight where we're talking tips and tricks, we're talking strategies, we're talking pitfalls, we're getting very hands-on. But I feel like it's my job first to just sort of help us take a step back and talk about a few things that I believe, both from my parenting journey, but also just in terms of my own faith and study of the scriptures, that if we don't embrace and wrestle with and really push into a couple key realities, if you will, when it comes to this idea of what it means to be human, what it means to live in a broken world, I think all the tips and tricks and all the other stuff kind of will eventually fall flat, right? They might be helpful for a time, but I think if we don't sort of first off address some of the really key things of just why we're in this whole thing of social, emotional journey and all that to begin with, we might really miss it. And so that's what I want to do just for a couple minutes. And it reminds me of a story that if I go back a couple years now, a student of mine named Zach, great young man, very, very curious, very intellectual, very thoughtful, conscientious young man, graduated from Bear Creek a couple years ago. I was talking with him one day, and I was presenting to him sort of this like invitation to help me craft some things for the upper school. And specifically what I want to talk with him about is, hey, help me think through how we can talk to you guys as students about technology and about social media and how we can equip you to understand the right tools to use, the wrong tools that you probably shouldn't use, the pitfalls that you might be tempted to fall into, just all of that kind of stuff, right? And I was hoping to get really granular with him, hear directly from a teenager living it and say, this is what, Mr. Urban, this is what we need. This is what we need you to do for us as educators in this place. And he thought about it for a second as I threw that out to him. And he told me two things. The first one, if I'm honest, hurt my feelings a little bit, but I recognized he's right. And that was simply, he looked at me in a very kind way. This is just my Reader's Digest version of what he said. He said, here's the thing, Mr. Urban. The students in this building, they already know a lot more about all that stuff than you do. I was like, oh, okay. But I thought about it a little bit more, and I was like, I think Zach is probably right. But then he said this, and this is what really stuck with me. It was very fundamental and simple on the one hand, and yet as I thought about it and processed it, and now having processed it for multiple years since he said it to me, it was actually one of the most profound things I've ever heard in my life from a teenager. And this is what he said to me that day. Mr. Urban, I think the real problem is sin. And here's what I think he meant by that. I think what Zach was trying to tell me is, hey, I get it. We need to get into the particulars of social media. We need to get into the particulars of the pitfalls and the good tools and the bad tools and all that kind of stuff. But if we don't first have a conversation around this, the fact that as human beings, we have a propensity to do things that are not healthy. We have a propensity to do things that cause conflict. We have a propensity to live in such a way that sometimes doesn't quite go along with God's good created order for us. All the rest of it might not help all that much in the end. And for a 17-year-old young man to look at me and say that, again, was a very profound moment for me. And I had to stop and say, Zach, you're right. You're absolutely right. And again, this whole idea of sin, it's not so much a theological concept he and I were going to unpack in that moment. It was really just the simple reality that as human beings, we're just messy, right? There's things going on inside of us all the time that push us in certain directions, that cause us to see the world in a certain way, that cause us to not get along with each other sometimes, right? Teenager, adult, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And what it did for me is, again, help me take a step back and say, okay, when these types of conversations come up, how do we help teens navigate their social emotional lives? It just reminded me, we got to take a step back and remember some realities that we're dealing with first, and then we can jump into the particulars. So for tonight, I just want to be reminded, or help us remember maybe, a few things. So in James, the writer says this, James chapter 4, this is in the New Testament. He asked this rhetorical question, and I think when it comes to any human relationship, but hopefully tonight we'll learn how to apply this particularly to our relationship with teenagers. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Now, of course, he already knows the answer, but he just wants to pose the question. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? In other words, he's just saying, let's be real about the fact that we have conflict, we have misunderstanding, we have emotional highs, we have emotional lows, we have all this stuff that's really messy in life, right? Not because we live in a world where there's all these tough things coming at us from the outside, that's part of it, but we live in a reality where on the inside, for every human being, there's a war that's going on. There's a battle that is waging. And I think that's what James is just helping us to recognize. It's not super profound. It's not even really that complicated, but it's a reality that we can often forget to acknowledge and start with on this journey of life, and even particular to parenting. He says a little bit more here as he goes on with his letter. Again, he says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. Now, obviously that doesn't happen in every case. That's the extreme, but James is really just trying to use some strong language here to get us to pay attention. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. And when you ask, and this is so amazing to me, even after he gives us here's the real problem. You've got this battle going on within you. You're looking to other people and other external factors to bring you peace. They never will. So what you need to do is go to God. But even then, he says, but sometimes even when we go to God, that could be problematic, because he says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. It's still about something selfish in you that is what ultimately causes all these fights and quarrels anyway. So you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. The reason I bring this up, this wasn't supposed to be a sermon tonight or a Bible study, but the reality is, as we go into any relationship, but particularly as we think about how do we love and guide and equip our teenagers to thrive, to live healthy lives, to be socially healthy, to be emotionally healthy, we have to recognize that there is a battle waging within them. Not because they're teenagers, but because they're humans. And if we don't recognize that, we can do a lot of things when it comes to parenting and educating and all that kind of stuff, that at the end of the day, we're like, why isn't this working? And you just feel like you're beating your head against the wall. It's because we haven't stopped to think, wait a second. Before I can get all of the other stuff, I got to remember there's something else going on in here. The second thing I want to bring up along those lines is that we need to stop and also remember that that is also true of us. Whether you're here tonight as a parent of a teen, you're a parent of a preteen, you are an educator, you're a counselor, whatever you do where you're working with teenagers or you're going to work with teenagers, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. The same thing that we just said is true about our teens is true of us. Now, we could be the healthiest people in the world and still have our teens drive us crazy, and they can still make mistakes, and they can still go on an emotional, social roller coaster, for sure. But I think what we can be pretty sure of is it's going to be hard for us to guide them through that. It's going to be hard for us to shepherd them, to love them, to equip them as best as possible for a healthy social and emotional life if we aren't constantly working on our own health as well. If we're not recognizing there's a battle going on within us, and we need to work on that as we help our teens as well. You guys know the old announcement on the airplane, right? Please, 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 before you assist our younger passengers, put on your own oxygen mask first. I think that's a spiritual principle. I actually think that goes well beyond airplanes. I think that is something that God would say, hey, you know what? If you want to really help your child, your teenagers, your loved ones go through this journey, be sure you're always looking in the mirror first and saying, what do I need to continue to do to be healthy? How do I go to God for the answers? How do I recognize the battles that are waging within me? And how do I work on that before I even start to figure out maybe my own kids' problems, right? It's not a teenager thing, it's just a human thing. That's the foundation on which I want us to talk tonight, because again, I think when we at least acknowledge, if not wrestle with those realities, That's when all the tips and the tricks and really getting in the weeds that we want to do with you tonight, I think that's when some of that stuff starts to make sense and where we can really start to make an impact. All right? So with that, I'm actually going to ask our panel to come on out. I'm going to introduce these guys to you. These are people who, like I said, their lives right now are very much about teenagers. And they have a lot, therefore, to say and share with us tonight. So guys, go ahead and come on out. Find your seats there. So all the way down to my left there, that is Mrs. Amy Burns. Amy is our 9th grade English and literature teacher here in the upper school at Bear Creek. Right next to her is Mr. Daniel Bates, former youth pastor, but also now our middle school dean of students here at Bear Creek. And then Kelsey Bolton is one of our school counselors. And what we want to do tonight is really just kind of glean from their experience. Again, they live this every day. You guys do too, as parents and people in teens' lives. But we have this unique opportunity to kind of say, okay, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing that maybe could help those of us as parents also recognize, oh, gosh, maybe that's something where I can start to see things a little bit differently or apply, again, some of those tips and tricks, all with remembering, right? There's some bigger realities in which all of this is playing out, and that's, again, where we want to focus. So, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing this. We're going to have some fun tonight. And so what we've done is we've kind of broken this up into 3 big buckets that we're going to try to keep our questions within for the panel. But we want to kind of just take this wherever it goes. So these guys might just, bring up some other stuff too. We'll see what happens. They got a lot of good things to share. But first we want to kind of stay in this realm of supporting our children's emotional lives. And so guys, we all know that the emotional life of a teenager is a roller coaster at best, right? But let's start with the positive. What do we know about adolescence, about how this whole thing works, that reassures us that the roller coaster is normal and it's actually not something we need to be afraid of? So, Kelsey, I would love to start with you. As a professional counselor, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think for me as a counselor, it really helps to think about my expectations. And so childhood development is really informative on, what should I be expecting to see? So I think we can kind of break it down with adolescents to the things that we're seeing and then the things that we're not seeing when we're trying to understand them. And the things that we're seeing are those behaviors or the things that they're saying. And what we're often seeing is probably withdrawing, maybe some more disconnecting. Usually through elementary, family is essential to a child. And as they get a little bit older, around 11 to 12 years old, they start getting into thinking more about, what do my friends think, or wanting to fit in and trying to find acceptance there. And so I think those are some of the things we might start seeing: more withdrawing, more isolating, more, hey, let me go do this on my own a bit more. And then the things that we're maybe not seeing, but there's a lot of research out there on the brain these days, which is super exciting, is like the prefrontal cortex is still developing in their adolescence years. And I actually recently learned, I think for a while I thought it was like late 20s was the most recent information on like when does our prefrontal cortex stop developing. It's actually developing into our 30s now and probably 40s. It keeps increasing more and more as the research increases. So yeah, like recognizing like that prefrontal cortex is the last part of our brain to develop, and that's where like our executive functioning skills are, and those skills are like emotional control, self-control, response inhibition, like being able to stop myself from acting impulsively. There's a lot more. They're called the executive skills, like, big nuanced, big decision type skills. So that's happening, like that's still growing. And then at the same time, this is another thing I recently learned, is at about age 14, and the amygdala, which is kind of like our instinct emotion center of the brain, is at around 14, there's about 2 million neurons that are like suddenly exploding in their brain. And that means that their emotions are super intense and super high. And so like when we feel sad or melancholy, they feel like they're in the depths of despair, to like use an Anne of Green Gables reference. But when we're feeling irritated, they're feeling enraged, or can be. And so their emotions are their prefrontal cortex is still growing, and then their emotions are just like way ramped up. And so the skills, the amount of intensity of emotion that they're experiencing and stress and changing bodies, and then prefrontal cortex is still trying to catch up.
That's fascinating, and that's very, again, just encouraging to know some of the science behind it, right? That this isn't random for us as parents and educators. Like, what the heck is going on with, like, this is actually just part of the process. This is part of how we're growing and how God has wired us, and just how to keep growing through all that. It's also very reassuring that it's still going on in the 40s. Is that so? Okay, good. That explains a lot for me, so that's perfect. Okay, so each of you guys in your professional lives put you in a position where you regularly have to help teens kind of just navigate stress and anxiety and all those sorts of things. What have you guys learned from those experiences that might be helpful for parents to hear when it comes to them supporting their children? So Amy, let's start with you on this, because as a 9th grade teacher, you encounter this academically, but also I think you encounter this just as students start to build a relationship with you and open up to you and share things with you. What, as a mentor to a lot of teenagers in this building, what have you learned about that roller coaster of stress and anxiety, and how you've learned to just sort of go on that with them as a loving, supportive adult?
So 9th graders, as Kelsey said, they're 14, so their emotions are very, very big. And a lot of times they can have trouble sometimes communicating that. That can be really hard for a lot of 9th graders especially, because again, they're experiencing a lot of these emotions, and they may have felt inklings of these before, but they're way more intense now. And so I think the main thing to remember is that when students come to you and they are visibly distressed, or they are crying, or they're very, very angry, or something like that, one of the best things that you can do is just come alongside them. Sometimes that's literally a student sitting down right next to me, so that they feel like, okay, this is more of a partnership moment. Our body language can say a lot about what we're actually communicating to young people. And so a lot of times when students come in, take a seat, tell me what's going on. Oh, I'm really stressed. Well, tell me more about it. And just asking really simple questions where they feel that they're actually able to communicate what it is that they're feeling, and they can really start processing through that. Having space and time for students to do that is really monumental, because again, they start to see, oh, this person cares about me, they're listening to me, I'm not passing judgment on them, I'm not like, oh, well, why would you be so stressed about that test? This is ridiculous, don't be that. So just really making sure that I'm staying pretty neutral in the situation. I'm the adult in the room, right? I'm not getting on the roller coaster with them. They are very much on the ride, but I'm kind of standing on the platform waiting for them to come back around. So I think just making sure that, I'm constantly, like Dave, you were saying, I'm checking myself too, just knowing how am I doing and that kind of thing, but then also just communicating to them, like, I hear you, I'm listening to you. And sometimes I honestly just ask them too, do you want advice, or do you want me just to listen? And sometimes they'll say, I want you to give me advice, and sometimes they say, I just want you to listen. And that's okay, because then I know how I can come alongside them and support them in the best way. So I think just asking really simple questions, getting them to talk, staying neutral in those situations, that can be some of the best things that you can do when students are very emotional.
That's awesome. That's super helpful. Daniel, I know that as Dean of Students now, you encounter stress and anxiety with kids a lot, but I'd actually love to hear you go back a little bit into your youth pastor days, and just as kind of being in that role of a spiritual mentor and guide for students, how did you enter into that kind of reality with kids, of just this emotional roller coaster of anxiety and stress that's just real? It's not weird, it's not wrong, it's just real for all teenagers.
Right. Well, first I want to say, Amy, that's good advice, just relationally. I'm still learning this stuff with my wife. Do you want me to just listen, or do you want advice? Yep. I often confuse the two. But when it comes to young people, something that I learned, and this is from Fuller, and they have a youth institute where they talk to young people all across the country. And I was actually having this conversation earlier, but what they have boiled it all down to are 3 big questions that all young people are asking. It's, who am I? Where do I belong? And what's my purpose? Who am I? identity, right? Belonging and purpose. What can I do and does it matter? Right? All of those things. And so what that does is help me and help, all of us that are working with teenagers or young people is just reframe not only the things that we're seeing, but the things that they're saying, right? What is the actual pain point? What's the question behind the question, right? And that's what I have learned, I think, it allows me to be in peace. And as I reflect and evaluate myself, right, it changes how I approach it, because maybe I have an insecurity in one of those questions, because those questions aren't for just young people, but those questions are all the things that we're asking. And as Kelsey, brilliantly said, is that their amygdala is firing off. So though we're feeling those things, that sensation is much greater for those teenagers as we wrestle with those questions and those questions of life. Who am I? That's a question that I think if I asked you all, it would take you a moment to answer. Where do I belong? All of those things, it gives us pause to stop and reflect. And our teenagers are just on that journey, trying to figure it out and asking those questions to us. Now, do we answer it? Do we sit and listen? That's going to be a case-by-case scenario, right? What I've also found is that sometimes I just have the opportunity to ask questions instead of answering them. I don't have to be the one that has the answers. I can be guiding some of I can give them some more guiding questions to go along with the three big ones that they're already wrestling with.
That's awesome. That's really helpful. Kelsey, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. I think you probably have the most unique experience with this, because I know in the counseling office, oftentimes it's not like a buildup. It's a boom. We've got right from the go, big emotions, big trauma, big something. What have you learned from that perspective of how you walk with a student when it's, again, it's not small, it's immediately really big in terms of the emotions and sort of the crisis nature of this whole thing?
Yeah, I was thinking about how when I went to grad school to get my counseling degree, what did I spend the most time learning? And I feel like it was about 75 to 80% learning how to have a therapeutic conversation. And most of that was unlearning how I normally had conversations and tried to help people. And so, when this comes up with students, it's a lot of learning, like just listening to them and trying not to fix it for them. And so I think what I've learned a lot in that experience is how to ask questions to get them to the place that I can kind of maybe see in the distance for them. Like, maybe they're having like a thinking error, or maybe they're kind of missing an essential piece because those executive functioning skills are not all the way there. So they're maybe not considering all the different aspects in a situation. Really trying to help them explore what they're feeling and how it came about, but also helping them to feel regulated on their own, trying to create that space for them. I feel like that's a big part of it.
I love what you said about just asking good questions, right? I mean, I think it's so human in our brokenness to just when we hear something traumatic, something stressful, something from another human being, to just like, well, here's what you need to do to fix it, as opposed to empowering someone through good questions to help them kind of figure out and have that aha moment on their own. And when we have those aha moments on our own, we tend to own the solution much more than when we're like forced it upon us. So yeah, that's really good. Let's, for sake of time, let's move a little bit now to social lives, right? And I want to start with the role other adults can play in teenagers' lives, like the three of you, beyond mom and dad, right? So my son is currently a freshman at college, and I know for a long time, and I've confessed this already to these guys, it's not something I'm proud of, but for a long time I felt like if I wasn't meeting every like mentorship sort of need for my son, that I was somehow failing. And I carried that with me for quite a while, right? When I realized like, oh my gosh, he's still struggling in this area, or this is going on, and I'm not providing everything he needs to get through it and thrive and be triumphant. I just felt like I was a failure as a parent. And by the grace of God, I've come to realize, no, not necessarily. I mean, yes, I can fail for sure, but I think it was part of God's plan to bring a lot of people together for our teenagers to help them thrive and to learn and to grow. And it's not just for mom and dad, although mom and dad are certainly the primary players in that. So Daniel, let's go back to you. As a youth pastor, you were often one of those people, right, who supplemented guidance and nurturing and caring for teenagers. Can you talk to us about the value of that and why parents should invite those types of relationships into their kids' lives?
Dave, I first want to say you're forgiven for failing, okay? It's okay.
Have another pastor.
We're a community of faith. Yeah, man, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. I actually want to reference Fuller Youth Institute again. Here's another study that they did. It's called Sticky Faith. There's a whole book, but it came from years and years of research. And what they have found is that when your student, your child has 5 non-parent adults in their life, there's a much higher chance of them holding on to the things that you taught them, actually, especially when it comes to their faith. Right, here we go. 5 non-parent adults, so you can't count yourself, okay? And it's called Sticky Faith. You can do a little more research on it, or maybe we'll provide some of it in the resources. But what I think what Dave is talking about and experiencing, a lot of us feel and experience. And there's another book I want to reference we're talking about a lot is The Anxious Generation. And it talks about how we are holding on to our kids, trying to protect them from the mean, nasty, dirty world, right? And what it does is actually, the book is called The Anxious Generation, but the point of it is actually we're anxious and we've made them anxious. We're depressed and we've made them depressed. We're afraid and we've made them afraid, right? Out of our fears. I mean, he keeps referencing that I was a youth pastor, but you guys should know youth ministry is very young, and youth ministry came out of our own adult anxiety. How do we protect our youth from sex, drugs, and rock and roll? That's really where it came from, adult anxiety. When in reality, as I was sharing before, you actually need the community to hold on, to undergird, right? Everything that you're teaching them as parents. We're in this day and age where we're very independent, but communal living is what we're all intended and meant to do. Where do I know that? That's from the Word of God, right? I didn't just make that up. That's not Fuller either. That's from the Word of God, right? And we see this even in our relationships where, sorry guys, did I do it? Did I cross the line? Did I say something? But I was just thinking, lastly, like we see this even in our relationships. Like I'm thinking in my relationship with my spouse. I'm from Long Beach, California. She's from Sao Paulo, Brazil. And we're trying to do it. We're trying to make it happen. We're trying to make this family thing happen. But really, I'm trying to ask her to be everything, right? To be the aunts, uncles, cousin, neighbors, all that stuff that we're built to do. She's having to be an all-encompassing partner instead of the communal living, right, that we're built and intended to live into. And so it is extremely important that we trust our community and allow those people to come around them and be a mentor figure in their lives. So whether it's showing up to a game or, texting them late at night or whatever it may be, we need people that are in their lives and that have intimate relationships with them.
Yeah, that's so encouraging. Honestly, it's quite convicting too. I think as adults, parents, we need to kind of stop and really reflect on that, right? Like who's the team? Sorry, guys. Who's the team? Who's the community that is gathering around my kiddo? And like I said, I took me a while to learn that, but it's such a valuable lesson to kind of come to grips with. So that's obviously, we started there because that's a part of your teen's social lives, right? When we talk about this idea of helping them navigate their social lives, we want to recognize the fact that adults are a big part of that. We tend to just think of it in terms of their buddies and their friends and the kids they hang out with, but it's all encompassing, and we really need to stop and kind of reflect on that. Amy, you spend a lot of time observing and even dialoguing with your students about friendships. We've had lots of conversations about this. You're a teacher that I think students open up to and talk to you about a lot of things that are going on for them. And ninth grade, as you've mentioned, can be pretty messy in that arena, right? So what have you noticed tends to be true about kids who have healthy friendships with other teens?
So I think students that have healthy friendships with one another, they have a couple different factors that kind of set them apart from students that maybe struggle with really messy friendships. And first of all friendships and relationships will be messy because we're all human and we're all trying to figure out how to communicate with one another. And we're also all trying to figure out, like especially at 14, 15, 16, you're figuring out yourself too. So just a preface to that. But I think what sets students apart in their ability to navigate friendships in a healthy way is, one, they have a really clear understanding of what boundaries are and being able to recognize, you guys were talking about it a little bit, like maybe I'm holding on to too much of my friend's problems, right? And maybe that's also impacting me. And I don't know how to communicate that to my friend because I love this person, I care about this person, I want to communicate support, but I'm also not okay because these problems are affecting me. So I think when students start to understand that there is such a thing as healthy boundaries and that you can say no to somebody and that's actually out of love and that can be very loving and the best thing that you can do for that person, I think when students show that capacity, that's huge in their ability to form deeper, more healthy friendships, and then also have friendships later on in the later grades, which I thankfully also get to observe. And then also it sets them up to be successful when they go off to college and that kind of thing. The second thing I would say that sets students apart with healthy friendships is they really have seen healthy adult friendships modeled for them. So this is where, again, it's uncomfortable because we have to reflect on our own friendships as adults and how we're actually modeling that for our children, right? And that can be really uncomfortable because you go, do I have friends? Do I have
like
healthy
me?
friendships? That kind of thing, right? Where again, we can connect to our 14-year-olds of like, who am I? Where do I belong? And that sort of thing. So it's also asking yourself, are you a part of an adult community where you're also modeling healthy friendships for your children? That obviously can be through church, through, friendships that you have that, maybe you made a best friend at work and that kind of thing, and you spend time with that person. But I think when students see healthy adult friendships modeled for them and also healthy conflict resolution modeled for them, that can really set students apart of, I've seen mom and dad do this. I've seen my mom talk to a friend about a hard issue and also be okay herself, So I think healthy boundaries is a huge thing, and also having healthy adult friendships modeled for them is a huge element.
That's awesome, and a great segue to the conflict piece, right? So that was kind of what have you observed in terms of what makes for really healthy friendships in teenagers? Kelsey, I'd love to ask you, so let's kind of flip to the negative side of this, and I'd love to get your your counseling perspective on this. When our teenagers are experiencing conflict with others, talk to us about sometimes when it's not so much about the other person, and it's more about how our teens are responding to that negative word, to that action, to that thing that may have caused the conflict externally. But maybe the issue sometimes is more how our teens process that and deal with that. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. So kind of typically in the teenage years, we have some typical thinking errors. So if you're familiar with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, there's kind of this idea that our thinking can get us into trouble, the way that we're thinking about a situation or what we believe about it. And there's some pretty typical patterns for people. And for teenagers, there's two that are pretty common that I think cause a lot of conflicts for them. And, they're still developing into it. And so one of them is imaginary audience, or another name for it is egocentrism, which is where they really do feel like everyone's watching them. People are watching what I'm doing right now. They are noticing what my hair looks like and if it's frizzy, and they see if I have a pimple, and they're just really noticing it, and they just feel like the spotlight is on them all the time. And so I think that can just add to the stress, and it can add to looking out for it with their peers. And then a second one is called personal fable. And this one is my personal favorite about a teenager. It's just kind of, it's just fun. for being a teenager, or watching, maybe not being the teenager, but getting to watch this happen. Is a personal fable is like when no one understands me, and like really believing that no one understands what I'm going through, and no one has gone through this before, and I don't know anyone else who has gone through this before, and so feeling really alone in that. So I think those two thinking areas are pretty common. They can kind of lead to the classic conflicts. And then also just like there's usually a higher reactivity, a higher like emotional response, and maybe less thinking about like how did I contribute to that situation. And so, I kind of think of it like when adults are helping them, like we're letting them borrow our prefrontal cortex, like letting them borrow our skills so that they can learn how to practice these regulation skills when these things are getting kind of hard or overwhelming.
That's awesome. And I think I hear the modeling piece of it from both of you guys, but also when it is time to talk, right? There is a time to now start to maybe share a little bit with our teens and coach them a little bit. There's a lot of things in there that if we understand those realities, we can probably start to help them recognize those realities as well, right? Because I think sometimes, and it's just human, but I'm guessing it's a lot more amplified in the teen years. It's so easy to miss the forest for the trees, right? I mean, we get so caught up in the anxiety and the emotion and all the stuff that we can just totally, even if it's obvious, miss some big realities of what's going on. And maybe sometimes we just need people to remind us or point those things out to us, for us as adults as well. But so that's really good. I'd like to hit on the topic of tech, social media, just for a moment. I know that kind of almost becomes cliche in this day and age to say, well, gosh, that's the big issue. But the reality is that is a big part of our students, our kids' social lives. I know for myself, this has been, for my wife and I, it's been a roller coaster. You're always trying to strike this balance of how do we protect, nurture, be parents, right? Be mom and dad, and sometimes have to just say, like, this is how it is, with the reality that we can't shelter our kids from the world. We can't, it's probably not wise to keep them away from all these things that the world basically runs on in terms of how we communicate and talk to each other. So we're constantly just trying to find that sweet spot of how do I love them? How do I care for them? How do I nurture them? How do sometimes we just be mom and dad and say, no, this is the standards, this is the expectations, this is what we do and don't do, and yet still helping them go through the process, go through the journey of the stress and the emotion and all the things that we just know are true about what they're going through. Does anyone have I'll just open up to all you guys, any thoughts or reflections on that specific piece and how that, of tech, social media, all that, but how that plays back to all these bigger concepts and ideas that we're kind of wrestling with tonight? Was that the hard question? Was that?
I think from a classroom setting, we don't use a lot of tech in my classroom because we read books. And reading books and looking at each other while we're talking about books is very important. Nice. And so that's just, that's a side tangent for another time. But I think a lot of times what I see is so often the cell phone is just like a mirror, right? They're just looking at themselves the whole time, or looking at other people and thinking about themselves the whole time, right? And that's not to say that tech is evil or bad. Like, I don't want to paint it as this picture of this looming tech giant and how it's horrible and all of that. Tech certainly can have its uses and all of that. It can be very beneficial, but I think the main question that I consistently think about is, it's not whether or not tech exists. It obviously exists, right? It's not about whether or not the world exists. The world exists. It's about, especially as a Christian, what am I going to do about it and how am I going to engage with it? And that can look very different for a lot of different kids, right? For some kids, they really get sucked into the phone, and it's a huge problem because they're addicted to it. For other kids, it's a helpful thing because they can calendar everything on it, and that sort of thing. Or they go on YouTube and they learn a new hobby, right? They learn how to cook. Oh, look, I made a cake. That's awesome. So cool, whatever. So I think it's just about balancing. And quite honestly, I think so much of it is also just asking God for wisdom and what's best, obviously, for your child, but then also what's best in how you go about navigating tech as a whole.
That's helpful. Daniel, can I put you on the spot?
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this, but what do you think is there something in and of itself, social media, texting, all this kind of stuff, it's morally neutral, right? I mean, it's just a thing, but where do you see when it gets really into how teens relate to each other? Where do you see it helping, and where do you see it being a hindrance? And maybe how we as parents can kind of, again, coach them through some of that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I think maybe just as humans that I want to maybe point out first is the engagement piece that Amy's pointing out, is that these skills are being lost of what does it mean to sit with someone in conflict, sit in front of them, look into their eyes, sit with that thing that I'm feeling as I talk to them because my heart's burning and I'm sweating a little bit, versus doing that over text because I might be a little bit of a way out, right? That's the first thing I want to say. And our students, right? Many of them were very young going through COVID. So they lost a lot of years of that development in the shutdown, right? And things of that nature. So there's like the negative side. It's pretty obvious. I'm very intrigued to see what the research shows in the future as far as like long-term effects, right? But we can definitely see some, if you've been working with students for a little while, you can definitely see some short-term effects that these students have lost a step socially, right? From the pandemic, but then only engaging on the screens. Now, as far as the positives, man, I've seen some really beautiful things for adults and as far as for young people too. It could be a beautiful place for collaboration, which is really awesome. Like I've saw people make a lot of beautiful art. I've seen people make a lot of beautiful art over using technology as a medium. I mean, people are making songs that are not even in the same place. You know what I mean? It's really, really cool what you can do. And then I think what I also see as really cool is the identifying that you could do. I thought I might have been the only person that's really interested in this thing. Maybe it's a really niche thing, but I'll look on the internet and I'll find there's a lot of people my age that are interested in this thing, and it can be such a unifier and a really beautiful one. And then I would say lastly, as far as like, this is just overall, I think like, wow, what an opportunity to spread the gospel and spread good news, right? Like, imagine if the disciples had technology and could, you know what I mean? And could bless things over the airwaves. I mean, what an awesome thing. But our kids, man, they are so savvy. They are so in tune, and they are in a world that is now, globalized, right? Where I travel with my wife to Brazil, where she's from, and the kids on the street look the same as they do here. It's really crazy because everybody's buying from Shine and Temu and all these things. Amazon is delivered all over the globe nowadays. It's quite interesting to see. But for the kids, it feels like, man, I'm in the in crowd, right? Even though for us, we're like, hey, don't be so obsessed with what everybody thinks. But for them, it's a tool that feels like, man, this is my way into society, to knowing about what's cool, what's happening at the time. And that, once again, that's not a value judgment. It just is what it is. Those are some thoughts. That's really insightful. I'm glad I asked you that. Okay. With our remaining time, let's move on to communication and just talk about how we communicate with our teens, what that whole world looks like. So, Daniel, I'm going to go back to you. Just both from your time as a youth pastor, but also as a dean of students. I know you have to figure out how to get things across to students, right? Like, how am I going to say things in such a way that it makes an impact, that it's effective, that it actually brings about a result maybe that, that would be good and that I'm hoping for. What have you learned about just how to effectively communicate with teenagers and all the different experiences that you've had with them? This one, Dave, is so personal because I have to do so much internal reflection. As I was talking about all that anxiety earlier, just because I know some things doesn't mean it goes away, right? And there's some things that really, make me angry or, make me disappointed in a student that really bothers me. But I've learned that students often reflect what it is that you give them. And so if they have, let's say something big happens, traumatic happens in their life, maybe they feel like they made a big decision or a wrong decision, instead of, classic blowing up at them, staying calm can really de-escalate even their own feelings and that amygdala that's exploding. And I'm sure Kelsey probably has some good things to say about this, but right, how we reflect back to them has so much to do with it. And we usually out the people that are, have big emotions and explode, but also, particularly in some cultures, there's the other side too, where we shut down. Right? In some family cultures, this is how you deal with conflict. You stop talking to them, right? And that's that shame thing. And kids, you know what they do? They find Amy and they come sit next to her because they know that she's going to listen to her. But seriously, so what we reflect, what we put out, man, it has so much what to do with how they receive that love, how they receive whatever it is that you have to say to them.
That's wonderful. Kelsey, do you want to hit on that a little bit? We're going off script, but I think in the counseling office, right, what Daniel just said makes a lot of sense, right? You have to figure out, how am I going to reflect back in a positive way? How am I going to say the words that these kids need to hear in the right way? I know it's not a perfect science, but do you have a little bit more you could add to that?
Yeah, I think I would go back to the listening. And I kind of always keep in my mind, like, silence is golden. Trying not to jump to saying something and letting there be space for them to feel or to experience the silence while I've got them sitting and not have a phone in front of them. Yeah. Right? So I think helping them get to, like what you were saying, like that experience of figuring that out on their own is just really big, especially as they're in that stage of life where they're learning about who they are and what they like and what they value and how do I think about the world and how do I think about myself and these other people and what's my purpose and getting existential. Just really exciting to get existential for the first time. Yeah, I think the teenage years are so exciting. So anyway, yeah, I think making space is kind of what I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very helpful. Daniel, let's go back to you one more time because I know this is something you've done some personal research in. Obviously, when it comes to communicating with our teenagers, one of the things we need to talk about is when we have conflict with them, right? It's not just they have conflict with one another; they have conflict with us as the adults in their lives. That's just a part of the journey too. What could you share with us tonight that would be helpful in terms of how we might approach? Because it's not a matter of if; it's just a matter of when. And we all know this as parents, right? How do we navigate that? How can we enter into conflict with our teenagers in a way that's healthy, that's going to keep shepherding them through this social emotional journey that they're on? Mm-hmm. What insights can you give us on that?
Well, it's funny you asked that, Dave. What we have here is one of the handouts that are available to you all. And this is from a guy named Ken Sanders, and he does a lot of writing and research around conflict. Really awesome. He's a Christian guy. And so I took some classes kind of on his work and then some classes on how do I get peers to mediate conflict on their own as well. Really awesome stuff. You can ask me about it later. But here's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. And it's really just about our own conflict styles. A lot of this comes from what we experienced as kids. I don't know if you guys are getting the point, but a lot of this stuff having to do with social emotional lives has to do with our own selves first, right? Just like the gospel, isn't it, Dave? But can I just rattle off the 5 that this guy highlights? An accommodating conflict style, which means like I'm always giving in, or if you're the teen, you always have to give in to what the parent says. Avoiding, right? You're sidestepping conflict, never dealing with it. I'm a professional at this one, and I can just push it down, stuff it. Compromising, which is really a golden one, where we get to meet halfway, and both sides feel very positive about what they get and what comes out of the conflict. Competing, where one party seeks to win over the other or like outdo the other one. We do a lot of this in a lot of our arguing with our teens while they don't even have a prefrontal cortex that's fully developed, right? Like, doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it that way. And my favorite one is just collaboration, where both parties are really working together to find a solution. I think there's one other piece I would like to add. This is just helpful for me. He describes conflict as twofold: incompatible goals or incompatible means to that goal. incompatible goals, right? You might want something for your teen and they're like, I don't want that, right? Or incompatible means to that goal. How should we get there? How do I teach this student responsibility? Do we take their phones? Do we take things from them? Do we only encourage them, right? There's a lot of ways to go about it, but that helps me reframe. And in my work life, in my relationship with my wife, but also in relationship with these students, it really helps me reframe that conflict well.
That's really powerful. I'm grateful you brought that up. We're just about out of time, but I want to ask one last question. This is for you, Amy. And I know we've talked about this a little bit. I know you don't like me to ask you this question because you're a humble person. But it's, again, I think it's important. You're just one of those teachers. Kids just come to you. They want to get your advice. They want to be with you. They just love to hear from Mrs. Burns, right? Whether it's just for them to kind of unload and just sort of get off their chest what they're thinking and what they're going through, or just to get your advice on things. Again, hard question to answer, but I'm really putting you on the spot. Why is that? What do you think it is that you've established with teenagers that makes so many students just feel so comfortable to kind of open up to you and have those types of conversations with you?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for that bomb of a
It's the
question.
truth.
There.
It is the truth.
No, thank you. I truly believe that I've been called and equipped by Jesus to do this job and to come alongside many of your own students and love them and listen to them. And it truly is such an honor and a gift to do that. So I think that's the biggest thing, but that's not what you guys want to hear. You do want to hear it, but you're like, no, how can we do that too? Honestly, I think, I don't know. I went through a lot of really hard things as a teenager where I didn't really have an adult that walked alongside of me and poured into me the way that I often do to my students. And so I think just through that experience and through going through a lot of difficulties as a teenager, that just gave me insight as an adult of what these kids actually want. And you know what they actually want? They just want you to tell them that you love them, that you are here for them, and that you support them, and that they want to see that they can run to you and they know that they can receive love even when they have messed up. The reality of the situation is a lot of students come to me and I'm not just hyping them up wow, you're so amazing and all of this. I do encourage them. But one of the things that students know when they come to me is they are going to hear the truth. And just a couple weeks ago, I was talking with a student. She was in my room after school. She was having a really hard time. I listened to her. We talked about what was going on. And I was like, okay, we've kind of talked about the situation. And she's like, yeah, now what do you have to say about it? And ultimately, I said, well, I'm going to tell you the truth, right? And she was like, mm-hmm. I was like, well, that's why you're here. So ultimately, students just know that I'm not going to beat around the bush with them. I'm going to be very direct, and I will tell them the truth, even when the truth is something that may be hurtful to them, as in they don't want to hear it because they don't necessarily want to deal with that, right? But ultimately, following in the way of Jesus, Jesus does confront us. And ultimately, I will always side with Jesus on things. And so sometimes it is just being very honest with them and saying hey, I think that maybe we need to think more about this. And a lot of times we pray and whatever, and it's very lovely, it's beautiful. But I think just walking alongside of students and just helping them to see, I'm not judging them necessarily. You can come and be broken because I know that I'm also broken. And I think that they sense that I have a very real sense of my own humanity. And I'm very aware that I also am in desperate need of Jesus's redemption. And so I think just creating that space, creating an environment where they can do that, where they can express their concerns, express their doubts, all of that. And ultimately where we can laugh and we can cry together and pray together with one another, I think is just something that a lot of students really value. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all three of you for what you do in countless teens' lives every day. It's what makes our school such a special place. Would you say thanks to them really quick for all that they shared? Karen's going to come back out in just a moment to kind of wrap us up, but I'd love to just pray for us. We're on this journey together. As Daniel reminded us, this is why we do this, right? Is because it's never just about us. God has brought us in a community together to encourage one another, to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And what more important place to do that in than in our teens' lives. So let's pray together. God, we're so grateful that you brought us all here tonight. We're grateful that we could come and just be real about this journey that our teenagers are on and the journey that we're on with them, God, to love them and equip them and challenge them and to just be there for them. Father, I know there's so many things we talked about tonight. I just pray that with each of us, you would implant in our hearts and minds exactly what you want us to walk away with. God, that thing that we felt inspired by, that thing that we felt convicted by, that thing that made us feel like we just need to keep asking questions. Lord, above all else, just help us to be present with our kids. Help us to just continue to love them with your love. Help us to just pour into them and to truly have your wisdom. God, you said if we would ask you for wisdom, you would be happy to give it to us. So we pray for wisdom tonight, that we would be able to love teenagers well. God, that you would just really give us insight into how to be there for them moment by moment, what that looks like. And God, at the end of the day, help us just rest upon your grace, knowing that the battle's waging in all of us, but God, you are the answer. You are who we look to for the strength and the peace and the security that we need. So God, bless these awesome parents. Thank you for them coming out on a Thursday night and just be a part of this event. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys. Karen, come on out.
Well, what a very full evening. Wasn't that just amazing to get a little insight at how your kids are loved here and cared for? And also the honesty that this is not cakewalk, right? Being parents of teens. So real quick, we got a lot of resources coming your way. You're going to have a survey as well. Please fill that out. We want you to know you're learning more about our counseling services here, not services, but resources. So you just can go to our school website and you'll see lots of links there. Very powerful, very good, some resources even for the students that they use. We have a couple handouts, the one that Daniel is referencing, and they're out there, but you'll receive them in the email as well. Real quick, we have just a couple sites. All of this information through we have a counselor here at Bear Creek and Upper School as well. So we have lots of resources. So definitely take time to go through that. Access is amazing. Certain topics, any topic you want to talk about. One thing that you might want to look at is the culture translator. You can sign up and get that weekly, and it gives you the insight, the new thing going on in your child's life. They even have conversation starters. So there's some great resources there. And then we'll go on. You have some online, you have some assessments, you have some people don't want to read, you have a TED Talk, and then these are lots of books. Remember the one that was the Anxious Generation mentioned, the brain, all that stuff that's happening. And then look at all that. Sorry to overwhelm you, but maybe at 11 o'clock at night, instead of going to bed, you could start looking at Amazon and check out some of these. There they are. From tech to all executive functioning, anxiety, there's a variety here. Again, I appreciate our counselors curating some of this for us. This is really important just in life and really before kids go off to college. You can actually call to test it. And so this is just something really good for people to know about, and you can even use it as a text. And then finally, this is something that Pete Matata told me about. He's our tech director. Fortunately, we have Grace here helping us tonight. Pete had an emergency to tend to, but this is the feelings wheel. I think we heard a lot about feelings, the frontal lobe not working, but even as parents. So go to Amazon and get that. It's a great deal and very, very helpful. Counselors use this in their workplace. And then I just want to remind you, sign up. Our Katie, the Dean of College Advising, is going to be speaking on Best Fit College. You invite your friends to that. Just to let you know, if you're interested in our upper school, you might be visiting. On November 21st, we'll have an open house, what to expect in upper school. Also, tours are available, so tell your friends. And really, some people think I can't do private school, but we are so blessed here. We are getting a lot more scholarships, people giving back to our community, including you. We have given over 3.1 million assistance to new applicants and returning. Very exciting. So you need to go to that website, and there's a wonderful video for you just to understand and share. And then we're done. We did it. Thank you so much for coming. And some of our panel members are going to be out there to say hi if you want to. You guys have a great night, and God bless you. Bye.